Welcome to Whispers from Hell, where untold horrors and chilling mysteries await your discovery. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single whisper from the darkness. Are you ready? Because once you step in, there's no turning back. And we got a warning about the building the boss. Let us know that people broke into it all the time to do crazy witchcraft stuff, and to be careful of anyone who might reside in it, such as hobos, cultists, and all ghosts, because it was supposedly haunted as hell at the site. Our radios would go off, and sometimes we'd hear someone talking. We thought it was just interference. Our harnesses would get tugged on and no one was there, and a few times I got to hear voices of people calling my name. I believe the place was haunted, and so did most of the guys. Several used to hold prayer circles before we went in, and a few refused to go in and would ask to be moved to different job sites, which we would do for their safety and ours. Quite a few things happened there, but nothing I can really call malicious. There were a few things that happened at the school that really did trip me out. One was when we had to do something called a pipe chase. Basically, I and another guy would follow a pipe for contaminants and remove them like loud asbestos or whatever. We were told that we had to remove some asbestos from several pipes that ran between the ceiling in what would be considered a cruel space. Usually these were a hassle because you have to keep your weight on IE beams and use boards in a very small area. But because we would do stuff like this often, it wasn't that much of a big deal. So while we were chasing this pipe, we ended up hitting a wall. The issue with that was that there wasn't supposed to be a wall there where the pipe met the wall. We could see that it led to an open area that had more contaminants. Our plans had shown that there was no wall, so I contacted my boss and asked him if it was okay for us to burst through. He gave the okay after making sure it wasn't weight-bearing and there wasn't another access to there without having to break through it. We were through after about an hour or two, making a hole big enough for me and my coworker. Immediately after we crawled through, we noticed that the pipe led to the corner of this area, and down close to where the pipe went down was a square cut out like if it had been a service entrance, but didn't have a door or ladder. It was just a straight cut square in the concrete. But because we didn't want to crawl back to the rig to get a ladder, then Russell said ladder into a confined space with another area that would require us to make the hole we made bigger. But because we didn't want to crawl back to get the rig to get a ladder, then Russell said ladder into a confined space into another area that would require us to make the hole we had bigger, to a spot that we weren't even sure had anything in it. I asked my coworker to spot me up while I used a rope to climb down there and see if we even needed to work in there. This was a huge no-no, and it could have easily gotten me fired, but we were already fed up with this place, and we just wanted to finish up and get out. Like we wanted out of there ASAP, and some of the guys had already been complaining about feeling like they were being watched, or that someone had put their hands on them. I'd also felt someone tugging up my harness a few times, and when I would look behind me, no one was there, so I climbed down. And it was pitch black. This room must have been about 30 or 40 feet. My headlamp and flashlight did not seem to be giving me much light at all. It was super weird. I remember asking my coworker to ask someone to run an extension cord in some lights because I literally couldn't see anything unless it was a few feet away from me. He told me he'd be a few minutes, and I really did not want to be in there, so I told him that I was fine and I was going to look around real quick to see if it was even worth the hassle. So when I'm walking around, I happened to see a shadow like if someone was standing in the corner, so I started asking this person who he was and what he was doing there, but there was no response. I thought it was a hobo who had found his way in somehow and didn't get a response, so I walked closer, and it turned out to be a mannequin that someone had somehow put there. I remember that I had put it on the ground and continued to look around and found a spot that had some contaminants, and I let my co-worker know I made the mistake of looking back where I had laid the mannequin down, and it had been moved from where it had been. Somehow it was now several feet away from where I had originally laid it. I literally freaked the hell out, scurried up the rope, but we still had to get the contaminants out, and I and my co-worker had to get a ladder and another 2 guys to keep an eye on us while we went down there to remove said contaminants. I wasn't willing to go back there alone, and the guy who had whole watch refused to be left on top by himself. What ended up happening is that while we were removing the contaminants, the radio started going crazy. My co-worker and I almost fell off our ladders because we felt someone push us hard from our harness, and also these guys on top kept asking us what the hell we wanted over radio and to stop messing around, because they claimed they kept hearing us call them from the hole. The mannequin also moved again, so we were already pretty sketched out and wanted to get out when we finished this job. Site ahead of schedule, we still had to go through inspection by a hygienist, and they asked to be accompanied by someone. Because they didn't want to go in alone, one of my bosses decided to accompany the dude, because he also wanted to see the halo that had gotten us all excited when they went down. He kept yelling at us over the radio to take things seriously because he thought we were messing with them, because creepy crap kept happening and they were inspecting every area that everyone had worked at. He knew that we took our job pretty serious. We had 0 tolerance on horseplay at our job sites, mostly because the job was pretty dangerous. We did report to several government agencies, and a lot of the jobs we did were for the government or huge private businesses. At the end of the thing, he mentioned that he felt someone pull on his tie-back hard enough to make a tear on it, and that the hygienist had heard people calling their name and had felt a hand. Basically, he said that they had gone through a gauntlet of crap. They also found the mannequin, and I guess that's when our boss lost his marbles and flipped out on us because he thought that we had put it there to mess with them. The strange thing about what he said was that it was standing in a corner where I had originally found it. There are a few other places I've been to that are pretty trippy. I think that school is the worst out of all of them, mostly because of the frequency of stuff that was going on and how absolutely crazy we sounded when we would get together and talk about it at our safety briefs before and after we ended our thing about buying stuff. So I got in touch with my friend Sasha, who lives a few states east and is more street smart. Sasha gave me good advice about best practices. She told me to ask about dosage, so when I turned to Monica, I asked about it. Monica told me she wasn't sure of the dosage. Actually, it was 1 drop on a sugar cube. I asked if maybe I should just eat half the cube to be safe, and she said it would be hard to tell where the drop landed, and she didn't know, so I shrugged, traded her for a pack of cheap beer, dropped acid, and saw some bands. Went home and returned to my normal life. On December 16th at 5:00 a.m. I'm having an emotionally vivid dream where I had the following dialogue. Sasha died today, but how she Wasn't sick. She overdosed. That doesn't make sense, Sasha. No surdoses. That doesn't make sense. I have to talk to Monica, as in Sasha's older sister. Monica, God no. And then I woke up abruptly, and very upset I could. Didn't shake the feeling until I eventually told Sasha about at midday that same evening. Nick messaged me to let me know that Monica had passed away. She passed in a traffic accident at 10 o'clock a.m. that morning, about 5 hours after I had the dream. I found out because there was a news article about it. I mean, this is weird, right? Has this ever happened to anyone? I work at Subway, sandwiches and stuff, so everyone at our store asides from my manager and the regional manager believe the store is haunted during the day. Everything is fine 99% of the time. Whatever is there likes to wait until night shift, specifically 8 till 11:00 p.m. and the entity also waits until you're separated from your co-workers or alone entirely. The only known time it's been active during the day is one time when the assistant manager was alone in the store and panning up bread on a holiday, so it would be unwed for the next day, he said. All was well until towards the end all of our closed store alerts were going off. The online order noise, drive-through headset beeping, toaster proofing oven, everything, and on top of that, the radio suddenly blasted on full volume. He finished the rad of it hastily and left another night. My coworker was making her way out of the store when she was grabbing her car keys. Her store clock yeeted itself off the wall and shattered. She cleaned up the glass and left. We still haven't gotten a new clock. The old assistant manager would sometimes stay extra late off the clock, of course, and mooch off the Wi-Fi to do homework. He said he always heard footsteps schling in equipment moving around in the bag, and my one only experience isn't very special. It was after closing due was locked, and my coworker was cleaning the bathrooms, and I was finishing the dishes. I was putting away a few on a high shelf and heard someone clear their throat behind me, scare the crap out of me, and it ended up dropping the balls. I turned around and said, "Screw you," before I could comprehend there was no one really to say it to the rest of the night. It was hella uncomfortable. That is kind of it. I still work there, don't do nights much anymore, not by choice. Anyway, to set the scene, my friend's a married couple, had just bought a house in Central Oregon. The house is a little ways outside of town, set back in the woods and bordering on a national forest. It sits on almost 3 acres of fairly wooded land, and there is a small second dwelling in the back that is essentially a one-bedroom house. They were letting me rent it from them, as we had all lived together for the last year in a rental house downtown. It's early July, and I had already moved in a few weeks ahead of them, because the husband was finishing an accelerated summer class. I was working from home and was the only one on the property. This was a bit before I adopted my dog, so I was really alone. All our neighbors are a ways off, since all the plots there are several acres minimum, so the little house is fairly isolated. It's about 9:30 a.m. and my work is in full swing. I would start early in the morning, and the phones were generally extremely busy at this time. Suddenly, I hear a knock on my door. This freaks me out, because I was supposed to be alone on the property, but I quickly pushed the anxiety out of my mind and figure one of my friend's friends probably came to work on the house and needed something from me. With the way my front door is positioned in relation to the windows, I have no way of seeing who is at the door without opening it. I open the doors to see this little old lady standing there. She introduces herself as the previous owner of the house, and asks if I'm the homeowner. I tell her no, that I'm renting the small unit from the homeowners, but that they should be moving in a few weeks from now. She then asks if she could take some flowers from the garden, claiming she planted them for her dead mother. I tell her to go for it because I didn't really care and needed to get back to work, so I closed the door and resumed working later. That day, when I clocked out for lunch, I called my friends to tell them what happened. They seemed oddly unsettled by the whole thing and explained to me that the house had been owned by one couple since it was built, and their daughter, who was not the woman at the door, was selling it because they had both passed away. This left me feeling a bit odd, but I shrugged it off and tried not to overthink it. A week later, my friends are doing work in the main house, but had parked in the garage, so it didn't look like anyone was there. I was working again as usual when I heard what sounded like someone walking through the brush outside. I texted my friend to ask what he was doing outside the house, but he said he wasn't at the house and that they were both still in the main house. So I got up and looked through my blinds into the backyard, and there's a woman rummaging through the brush. I couldn't tell what she was doing exactly, as the brush is fairly high back there, but I went out later and it seemed like she had been digging. Of course, this read me out of it. My car was the only one visible, so it would seem like I was alone. I immediately called my friends in the main house, who came out with their dogs to figure out what was going on. The dogs began barking as soon as they walked into the yard, because he barks at everything, but he still was out front in my house and she was behind it. As soon as she heard the dogs, I heard her start moving hurriedly away from the house. At this point, she had to move to one of the blind spots on the side of my house by the garage, so I could no longer watch her through the window. I heard my friend call after her, but she took off running into the woods. There had been no parked cars on the property, so she hadn't driven up. We never managed to catch up with her, as she had a pretty good head start, so I still don't know what she was doing around my house. I adopted a dog a few days later. I'd been in the process since before the initial encounter, and the dog was easily frightened by anything unexpected, so she barks and growls at any time, even when pine cones fall on the roof sometimes. She'll even bark at nothing anyway. To the flower lady, Don single quotes T.be creepy. Let's not meet. Again, I used to deliver pizzas for a pizzeria in Cape Town, South Africa. When I was in university, to make extra cash, I used to deliver to the same house quite often. Incidentally, this place was quite close to where I lived at the time. There was nothing overtly strange about this place, except that whoever would receive the pizzas would normally take quite a long time to come to the door, and would always ask me to pass them pizza through the security gate instead of unlocking it and making it easier for everyone involved. One quiet night, a call comes through for this house, and I collect the pizzas and get to the house reasonably quickly. This time, a lady who I'd never seen before is at the house. She opens the door and lets me in. It's not entirely uncommon to be let into a customer's house, so I don't think anything of it. She points me towards the kitchen, which is down quite a long corridor, and asks me to drop the pizzas off there. She follows me all the way, still nothing weird. The passage open up to an open plan dining room and lounge area. Through this area is the kitchen through a door on the left. As I was passing through the dining room lounge area, I saw for something that sticks with me to this day, an old-looking dentist chair with a person lying in it, whether the person was alive or not. I still don't know. He had a sheet covering his whole body except the very top of his head and his feet, which were duct taped together. I couldn't tell if he was breathing or not. The lady that opened the door was still right behind me. She said absolutely nothing. We went into the kitchen and she paid me for the pee. At this point, I was either expecting to be attacked by this lady or someone else hiding somewhere, or to be scared by the guy under the sheet, as some part of practical joke, not wanting to give anything away. I didn't say anything and prepared myself to either defend myself or not be frightened, should it be a joke. I walk out towards the front door, double-checking to see what I saw was correct and not just my imagination. The lady still behind me, all the way closed the door behind me. As I left and said nothing to this day, I still have no idea what was happening in that house. It could have just been some joke, but I really don't think it was. The presence of a dentist's chair still makes no sense, and I didn't see anything else that would suggest the residents of the house collected weird paraphernalia. I drive past that house quite often and still wonder if I was in any real danger. This happened to me and my friend around 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday. I live in an area where not much goes on and is pretty safe for the most part. Me and my friends are dumb teenagers, both males, that love urban exploring. Our favorite sites to explore are tunnels. At 7:30 p.m. one night, me and my friend were exploring some sites around the park 2 blocks away from our house of small tunnels to explore. We felt a little weird because we didn't feel as if we were alone. There were a couple of disc golfers, but we watched them leave, so at this point the park was completely empty. My friend and I were just exiting a all tunnel to get back to the park as we were waiting for the disc golfers to leave so we could go to the next secret spot, which were train tracks that were still somewhat in use. To get to the train tracks you have to go through an off path in the woods that has a few curves, so it was hard to see. My friend led the way. A few seconds later, I thought I had lost him, so I yelled his name. Here's where things got weird. I heard what seemed like an almost distant yell or shout from the train tracks. I thought he had sped up, so I jogged up ahead and eventually ran into my body. This was just around a curvy turn, so I asked him if he was okay, and he replied with yes, like nothing had happened. A little suspicion ran through my mind, so I asked him if he had yelled at me from the tracks and had come back to get me. Shockingly, he didn't. He was waiting for me just at the turn, and he also said he heard the yell. While my friends and I are idiots, instead of going back, we quietly continued to the tracks. When we got up to the bridge with the train tracks, there was absolutely no one and nothing up there. All I knew was that I felt like I was being watched from the trees or something. I let my friend know about this feeling, and we quickly stopped throwing rocks into the creek and headed back to the park. I knew something was wrong as we were leaving. I just couldn't put my finger on it. We played around on the basketball court at the park before we left due to the creepy vibe. My friend and I decided it was best to take the main road back instead of the shortcut through the woods that led to our neighborhood. It was around 9:30 now. My friend and I were talking about what we should do all night because he was now spending the night. The park had a soccer field across the street from it, so it had 2 gravel parking lots that are sort of hidden by trees. As we were walking past one of the gravel lots, I felt what seemed to be like a warning from my body. I passed it off as nothing, but as we crossed the street from the gravel lot, Here's where things start getting creepy. I could see someone come out the shadows of the gravel lot they had appeared to be wearing. Very dark clothing and a hoodie covering their face. I was getting red flags everywhere the way they came out. Of nowhere was so subtle and perfectly timed. It was almost as if they were waiting for us to cross the ST. Following my friend hadn't seemed to notice the strange figure, so I told him to jog ahead a little, and he seemed confused, so I pulled him close to me and told him what I had just seen. He seemed anxious, so he picked up the pace a little bit. Every once in a while I would look over my shoulder to see where he was, and every time I looked, he would be at least 3 feet closer to us. I could hear the figure's eerie breathing. Thank God we were close to an alley shortcut that no one really used but me and my friends. To get to it, you had to go up a little hill left of the street. I saw this as an opportunity. I mumbled to my friend, use the alley. He quickly nodded yes, and the second we made it to the hill, we casually jogged up ahead to the alley. I told my friend to wait for a second, peeked over the street from the alley, and there I saw them what appeared to be a man in his 30s making his way towards us. Very quickly I could see his eyes now. They were staring directly at me with an evil and sinister look. I told my friend to bolt up the alley to his house, which was connected to the alley, and we'd never ran so fast. We made it up the street, took a sharp turn to the left. We lost him at this point, sprinted through his front door, unlocked every single entrance. We turned off all the lights and hid for what felt like an hour. Thank God he was nowhere to be seen. I've never seen this person again, and sincerely hope I never do. Many people become familiar with the concept of astral travel. Supposedly this is the ability to separate one's astral body. The only other way I can think to express it is the soul from one's body, so the soul can take spirit journeys to other realms while one's body is left safely at home. Shamans in many cultures throughout history have presumably trained themselves to take such journeys often in order to gain alt knowledge or insight about the future or about someone health. In any case, there have also been reports of spontaneous astral travel, where the event just happens to a person without their conscious control. People who suffer near death experiences often report their souls rising up and looking down at their bodies below. I once had no opinion about astral travel one way or another. I neither disbelieved nor believed it. I simply didn't know then an experience happened to me. It started out much like any other night, except that I felt more tired than usual and had decided to retire early. I recall it was a lovely winter night, very close to the Yuletide, and a gentle snow was falling outside. I snuggled down in bed to listen to my favorite YouTube channel, preparing myself for sleep. I felt very comfortable and was drifting off when I felt an unaccustomed lifting and a sense of weightlessness. I felt as though I were floating and suspended in air rather than sinking into the oblivion of unconscious as usual, and that my consciousness had shifted. I was hyper alert more even then than in a waking state. I opened my eyes, and lo and behold, I found myself floating near the ceiling, looking down at my inert body, peacefully laying in bed, fully illuminated by the glow of my laptop screen. I marveled at the situation. I had not sought this. I had not expected it. It was simply happening without any effort on my part. Oddly, I felt no fear, none at all. I just assumed I was dreaming. Was this what people called the lucid dream? Is so-called astral travel and so-called lucid dreaming one and the same? I had no idea. I just found myself some part of myself marveling at the experience. Two things I remember were the sense of weightlessness and lack of any physical discomfort. I felt buoyant and light and rather excited by it all. I also felt a strong desire to leave, to fly. The nearby my windows beckoned me, and before I knew it, I was on the other side of it opening. It had not been necessary. I didn't feel the coldness of winter, but I was flying very swiftly through it, as if on the power of a single thought. Soon I found myself above a vast dark ocean. The water looked very cold and unbroken as far as my eyes could see. Soon I reached land again and found myself in a town. It wasn't any town I was familiar with. The houses seemed strange. They looked old. They were all covered in the same wooden clapboard, sliding, stained deep brown and unpainted. All of these buildings were close together, attached in fact as toe houses are. Some of the buildings had 3 or 4 floors, others were lower, but they were all attached. I don't know why, but I got the impression I might be in a Scandinavian country, although I'd never been there. The night was very dark, and it seemed very cold, and snowflakes were drifting around the air. I found myself being drawn to one particular lighted window among this pile of buildings, one of the taller houses. Before I knew it, I was inside the window, and inside the house it became apparent there was a party guard going on. It was the Y party. There was much light laughter and chatting. People were moving about, sitting and standing with drinks in hand, or dressed quite nicely. I specifically remember a tall, attractive, blond man leaning against a counter that separated the wide entrance hall from the open-plan kitchen living room area where many people were. He was wearing a lovely knitted jumper, holding a drink and chatting with another man. I moved closer, only they had no cognizance of me at all. Clearly, I was not visible to them. I didn't overly marvel at this interesting situation. I more or less accepted it and moved on from room to room, exploring the house. What seemed most amazing to me was just how vivid everything seemed. I could discern every detail from my surroundings, the furnishing, the people, the activity. After making a circuit of the downstairs rooms, I came out once more into the wide entrance hall, which included a wide staircase of dark hardwood balustrade with the same on both sides. The wood was rather scuffed and worn with age, but the whole house, although clearly older, was comfortable and had good vibes. There were 2 children on the stairs, looking between the ages of 8 and 10, chatting and playing happily. I approached them with the idea of moving beyond them and hence up the stairway to explore, but then something shocking happened. The girl looked straight at me, her eyes wide, her face filled with utter terror, and before I knew it, she screamed. This all happened so fast. I remember thinking, you can actually see me. For some reason, I was visible to this one child. In an instant, I felt myself being pulled back. It was rather like the sensation of a telescope being retracted. The entire scene before me collapsed, and then I was back in bed, awake, with the voice from my laptop droning away next to me, much like I am to you now. This experience remains for me one of the most profound that I could perhaps label as paranormal, although it was very different to the ones that you usually hear about. Usually a narrator records an experience of seeing a ghost, often when they were a child. In this instance, Albie, it's still alive. I was the ghost. It's perfectly natural, I suppose, for people to react with fear and shock when they see someone or something that shouldn't be there. I suspect I might feel the same, but I wonder if every Encounter of this sort need to be seen as malevolent, perhaps so many so-called. Ghosts are merely what I was on that particular winter night, an unexpected soul traveler who finds themselves glimpsing in places just as strange to them as they may seem to the rare and gifted person capable of detecting their presence. Since this time, I have begun a course of self-training, and today I am capable of taking astral or lucid soul journeys at will. I've been to many places and met many interesting people on these journeys and have gained much insight, but have never encountered the little girl again. My experiences thus far have shifted my former view of what I define as supernatural. Maybe someday such experiences will become perfectly natural, and maybe one day we will recognize ghosts as just fellow souls who, voluntary or not, have a go at parting some interdimensional curtain. Les or Loveless is a character from Caribbean folklore. It's a human woman, usually having an attractive body and clothing, but with a hideous face which she keeps hidden. She has one human foot and one cow hoof. She lures males into the forest so they can get lost and never find their way back, and they end up dying or being eaten by wild animals, or perhaps meet some other gruesome fate. The following story happened in Trinidad. In the 80s, my uncle was living in the house I live in presently. It's my grandfather's house that my mother inherited in those days. It was my grandparents and their 8 children. My uncle was one of the older siblings and would work late night shifts and would return home between the hours of 11:00 p.m. to 1:00 p.m. Now my street, that then wasn't as developed as it is now. There was a lot of bush and forested areas with a few houses scattered in between. My house is about a quarter of a mile in the road and wasn't paved at the time, and more of a track than a road. One night when my uncle returned home from one of his night shifts, he saw in the distance a woman walking down the street. From the look of her clothing, he assumed it was my silent great-grandmother. She had had a few instances where she would wander off and reach far places, so initially my uncle thought it was her. He saw her familiar dress and the white shawl she always had draped over her head, and he could make out pieces of tattoos she had on her arm. Now he thought it was strange. It was the latest he ever saw her outside, and her house was at least 10 minutes walk from ours. He called out to her a few times, but she didn't turn. She just kept walking. At the time, my uncle decided to follow her and get her back home. As he neared her, he realized something really weird. He kept calling out to her, and yet she didn't turn around. When he looked down, he saw that my great-grandmother had a cow hoof where her left foot should have been. He was really close to her now, and when he noticed it, the woman stopped dead in her tracks. My uncle, in sheer terror, turned around and said he'd never run so fast in his entire life. He raced on home, and since that incident, he's always had my grandfather wait up for him until he eventually left that job. It's still a very early morning with patches of mist, and not being a weekend, there was very little going on. We are a couple of young policemen in a patrol car on what was then considered a main road. A joke now, and a joke then. It's a while back, and I'm not sure of the name of the village, but we were very close. The message over the radio was simple as I remembered. It was something along the lines of man with a gas mask in the main road. We were in the right place at the time, and within seconds, I saw a man jogging on the pavement to our left, rapidly pulling the gas mask from his face. Remember, in the UK, we drive on the Left side of the road, I got the distinct impression he had an erection. I stopped the car and without saying a word to my rookie colleague, fully opened his door. And with the narrow pavement, give a very clear signal to the jogger that we wanted him to stop the Jaeger obliged day. Little short of the car allowing himself to be well illuminated by the headlights, I got out of the car and approached him, and could not fail to notice a distinct sparkle that did not look like a concentration of sweat or urine on the inside of his uncovered legs. I think not. Surprisingly, by this time, his erection had subsided. There's nothing in the handbook on how to open a discussion in a situation like this, so I said what gives. With the mask replying without hesitation, "It gives sexual pleasure I get on the radio." To establish more details about the complaint, it didn't appear there was much substance to it, as the young lady was only startled, maybe frightened, as she got out of her car by a man running by her at 2 or 3 in the morning with a gas mask on his face. The next step is to establish his identity, which must have led me to look more closely at his clothing and where he was going to find some form of identity. Document when his shorts and shirt were made of thin plastic. I distinctly remember the shorts were black, presuming made from a large dirt bin bag, and his shirt was light-colored plastic, but I didn't pursue its origin. In my mind, he was also wearing a classic sleeveless cricket jumper pullover, which had a name tape sewn in behind the neck. Those who went to English boarding schools will remember these name tapes. He gave me his name and address, and quite speedily this was confirmed by radio from headquarters. And it was indeed an expensive son. A.R. Juger, admitted to being an executive in a large multinational company. I didn't question how this adventure might go down at the next board meeting, nor with his wife, if he had one. So what to do if there was no evidence of indecent exposure, no assault of any nature, which left the common law offense of breach of the peace, which I thought was stretching the evidence. I also had no desire to have this man in the back of the police car, or rather to be washing the wrist seat after taking him to the police station, only to be given a warning by a sergeant. So I explained that the young lady could have had grounds to make a formal complaint, resulting in a charge of breach of the peace. He said that sounds like the Army conduct prejudicial to good order. I agreed, and then suggested that if he wanted to dress up in this fashion, he should restrict his activities to private property, thinking his garden was quite big enough, not considering what his wife and neighbors might think. I then let him on. We then returned to the police station with a small assembled company. Wanted to know why I hadn't brought the jugger in. I asked why, and the unanimous response was that they wanted to see the fashion statement. My reason was not considered valid. A few days ago, I ordered a delivery service via an app called R. Happy that works in South America, where I live, and to be able to get the delivery, you obviously have to give the details like your cell phone number and house address. When I received the delivery, the guy started flirting with me and began asking me weird questions. I told him I was only 16, hoping that he would leave me alone, but he just tried to keep making conversation. But I told him to have a good day and shut the door. Fast forward to yesterday in the afternoon. Someone called my house phone number. Keep in mind that I don't give out that information in my app, and my mom picked up the phone, and the man told her that he wanted to talk to me, calling me by name. She asked who he was, and he told her he was one of my school friends. My mom gave me the phone, and the man told me who he was and gave me his name, which later turned out to be fake, and said I was very hot and that he wanted to meet up with me. I immediately hung up. The phone, I started looking through the Rapey app and see if there was some way to report this guy, but I couldn't find anything, and I tried to search in the delivery history and couldn't find anyone with the name. He told me I'm really creeped out right now because I don't know how he found out my house phone number, and he also knows exactly where I live. It's a pretty tricky situation. I just hope he never tries to reach out to me again. When I was 17 or so, I decided to become a novice urban explorer. I live in rural Minnesota, so there's no shortage of abandoned places to visit if you know where to look. My boyfriend at the time lived in a tiny community just north of Now Then, Minnesota, which had a 2-story house that had long been abandoned for 10 years. The story was a tree fell on the side of the house during a storm, and the guy didn't want to pay for the repairs and just left. I spoke with my boyfriend about exploring the place, but since there was a convenience store right across the street to evade detection, he pointed out we had to go at night. So we set our time to explore on Friday the 13th, 2013. The crew we had was me, my boyfriend, and 3 other guys. While my boyfriend and I were waiting for our friends, we get a call from them saying that the front wheel straight up spun off their car and they needed a ride. I'm not a particularly superstitious person, but it kind of seemed odd to me, seeing as the driver took really good care of his vehicle anyway. Let's fast forward to the action. It was around about PM, and my boyfriend parked his car on a dirt road about a quarter mile away from the house. We really didn't want to get caught and hiked in and decided to look in the backyard first. It was really overgrown with waist-high prairie grass and was generally uneventful until we looked into the back window of the house. One of them seemed to go into a pantry where there was still canned food on the shelf. The door to the pantry was open, and from there we could see a full set of living room furniture, couches, and all this kind of leaves me to disbelieve the whole. He left because of the tree falling thing. It seemed like the guy who left there left in a hurry. Our original plan was to go in through the back door, but it was locked with some industrial grade stuff, so we went around the front of the house, which had a screen enclosed porch. Thankfully, it was unlocked, and we were able to look around the porch area. Knee-high stacks of Life magazines were absolutely everywhere, some of them dating as far back as the 80s, whether worn and chewed through by animals. After falling around for about 10 minutes, we decided to embark inside. Naturally, being a 17-year-old girl in a group of 19-year-old guys, I was elected as the one to open the door. But once I put my hand on the doorknob, I heard a noise on the other side of the solid oak door. 4 deliberate, rapid-fire knocks. Everyone booked the hell out of there faster than I've ever seen. We ran the entire way back to my boyfriend's car, but it wouldn't start. Everyone was afraid to go outside, and one of my friends kept claiming that he heard footsteps coming towards us. This was probably rubbish in hindsight. After a few long minutes, my boyfriend's car finally decided to start, and we punched it back to his house. Once we got back, everyone had their speculations about what the hell was on the other side of the door. My personal theory was that there was a squatter inside that saw us snooping around and wanted to scare us away. I know that dilapidated houses can make weird noises, but the knocks we heard were very deliberate, not something a structural shift or animal could make. To this day, I have not visited the house again or any other abandoned house in the area. So kids, if Something seems like a bad idea. It probably is, and creepy squatter guy, let's never meet again. I'm here to share my story about an entity known as the Hapman. I'd never known this was something other people have experienced. It almost scares me more that other people have experienced this, but anyway, hear it. Goes my first experience was in my grandfather's house. I had a slew of weird experiences in this house, always kind of credited those experiences to my great-grandfather, a butcher and vice president of the local butcher union. The basement had clearly been designed for slaughtering pigs, a massive sink floor. Drains, the works. I'd felt things watching me. I'd slept, walked, and often woken up standing in the corner of the basement. Really weird stuff, the worst experience. And I'm getting chills just sharing this was. Waking up and looking into the hallway to see a pair of eyes staring back at me. I couldn't move, but I don't think I was asleep at this point before I knew it. Something was on top of me, pressing into the couch, and it felt like something was sucking the breath out my body, and just as quickly as it had started, it went away. The second is recent. My grandfather passed away. I've had countless dreams about him, nothing specific, but this is the one that sticks with me. In this dream, we were in my house, sitting in the kitchen, just talking, not about anything in particular, but just talking like we used to do. In the dream, I told him I needed to take a shower and get ready for work, and so I did. I had left the door open, as I usually do during my shower. I look into the hallway to see this black moose crawling down at it. Stands, its shape is human, but long. Its fingers come to points and are hanging below its knees. It says, "You don't belong here," and I wake up. I've been thinking about why something like this would appear. The first experience sounds more like sleep paralysis, but the second, I'm not so sure. I feel like it might be something that comes to you when your dreams tread into the realms of the afterlife. This happened to me over 10 years ago. It's been a long time on my mind. I was never a believer in the paranormal. My parents raised me atheist. My mom especially was a very nuns kind of woman. Didn't believe in religion, didn't believe in anything. And that's the way me and my family all viewed the world. That is, of course, until the following events transpired and my worldview started to change. As I said earlier, I used to work at a historic hotel that had been around for over 150 years. As far as I knew, the building in some form or another was a hotel. Obviously, it had undergone changes, plenty of them, and was a lot bigger than the grounds it originally stood on. As it had been so successful, it actually consumed much of the surrounding buildings. The hotel itself was quite nice, adorned in the roaring 20s style. Even the staff were made to wear old-timey clothes, all to add to the authenticity. As contracted night security from a different company, we didn't have to undergo such privileges in regards to our garments. Now the hotel itself was not that tall, but quite lengthy. It had loads of different rooms and corridors and the like, most of which we could observe via our cameras, and a small section of passages in the basement that were mostly used for housekeeping and laundry and stuff. Anyway, I had been working there a few weeks when I overhear a few of the night watchmen having a chat. I had arrived a few minutes early before I would be relieving them, and I would be doing the graveyard shift. I start getting chatting with them. I hadn't really spoken to them much before, and figured it'd be nice to make friends at the job. One of them, Darren, was telling a story about something he experienced a number of years ago. He's the kind of guy who, when he got his first job, stuck by it till the bitter end. I think he must have been working here at least 40 years or something, and he looked like he was on the cusp of retirement. I spoke to him for a while just before my shift, started asking him what it was like to work in the same place for so long. He explained how he enjoyed seeing the hotel change and undergo its renovations, how he'd seen many interesting people come and go, but one thing that stayed consistent with the spooky happenings in the hotel. He said it in a kind of comical way, so I wasn't sure if he was joking or not. He gave a little laugh and said he told me later I was working with another girl on the night shift. She was quite nice, and at some point in our infinite boredom, did we start chatting to each other about the supernatural. She brought it up, and I was curious more from an interest point of view rather than belief. Some of the stuff that had gone on around the hotel, she had been working there a few years now, and it seemed common knowledge that there was something afoot in the hotel that most people couldn't explain away. She said that she wasn't sure how many specters were populating the hotel, but she had heard a few stories, especially one that resonated with her from a disgruntled guest. She had been the person who had actually checked the guest out. She went on to tell the following story. It was a night much like this one, born boring. With not much to do, I was just sitting here at the desk when suddenly I hear the elevators ding, and out comes a woman running, holding her young son in her hand towards the front desk. She slams the key on the counter and says she wants to check out and needs a taxi now. In a flurry, ask her what's wrong and why she's choosing to leave at 3:00 a.m. Does she want to go to at the airport? She'd never given me an indication when I checked her in earlier that day. She goes all pink, looks me dead in the eye and says, "Girl, there's a ghost in your hotel, and I'm not staying here a minute longer. Get me a taxi to some other hotel, please. I can't deal with this." She calms down after a few minutes. As you can imagine, a 3:00 a.m. taxi isn't always going to arrive very quickly. I offer her some tea and biscuits, and after she and her tired son, who by this point had fallen asleep on one of the chairs, except she goes on to tell me what exactly happened. She said she felt like she was being watched since the moment she got into the room. She said the room itself was fine, but there was just an uncomfortable dread and eeriness seeping into her from just being inside. She tried to play it off as long as she could, but she woke up in the middle of the night to pee. Just as she was getting up to go, did she see something from the corner of her eye, but in her groggy state just assumed it was nothing. She went into the bathroom, and as an important detail said she didn't close the door and let the light trickle into the room, as the bathroom is in a sort of mini passageway before you went to the room itself. There wasn't that much light pollution that could have awoken her son, she explained, and she was scared that by closing the door and opening it again, there was more chance of that waking up her son than the light itself. I'm not sure why she added that, but she did. She then went on to say that just as she was getting up and about to wash her hands, did she see the shadow which she assumed she saw a moment ago, now by the arm of the light, trying to not feed too much into it. Did she turn? She said at that point the shadow moved. It made her jump because it darted straight towards her. She wasn't sure if it disappeared before it reached her or if it went right through her, but she turned around and there was no shadow in the room. At this point she was wide awake, freaked the hell out, got her son through there, stuff in the suitcase, put on some jeans and a jumper, and jumped straight out. I checked the room after they were gone. and couldn't find any remnants of anything. Spooky that was just one story she shared with me that night. Another one that I found particularly interesting was one that was later corroborated by Darren, although Darren's was far more complete, so I'll tell his version as it happened to a guy he worked with who was long since retired. This guy was working night security, and important detail is that this hotel has a roof. No one really uses it. It's got gravel on there, and I think some of the night guards when patrolling go up there just to have a smoke. So this guard goes upstairs midway through his rounds and has a smoke just staring into the sea of lights in the city. That's when he hears a crunching from behind him. Assuming it's one of his colleagues, he doesn't even turn around, but instinctively offers them a smoke, waiting for the crunching to get closer and for them to reach him. Just as he's looking out, he ponders as all the noises stop, so he asks again, but still doesn't turn around. So you going to come for the smoke? A voice from behind goes, yeah, in one of the deepest voices possible. For a moment, he just stands there pondering who this voice is. As far as he's aware, no one with this voice is even working here tonight. Not that he can recognize whose it is. In his curiosity and confusion, he turns around as he hears a crunch midway on the roof. He looks but sees no one, but the sound of the crunching of gravel is ever approaching towards his location. He's quite close to the edge at this point. He's maybe a few feet just looking out onto a sheer drop. As the gravel approaches, he just about craps his pants. He closes the door behind him, runs all the way down the stairs, and makes it to the front desk. The guy openly admitted to wetting himself on the way down. He was absolutely terrified. He called in sick the following week and reluctantly came back to work, but apparently never went up to smoke again on the roof of the hotel. The last story is one of my own. There were many other small things that happened. Guests that saw things in the middle of the night, much like the first lady workers who saw apparitions in hallways. People in old-timey clothes who would walk into the elevator, and when they'd reach the elevator themselves, they'd be gone. But the one that happened to me, or it not as scary as the others, fully convinced me that there might be something more to the paranormal than my family want me to think. I had been at work for about 2 hours. It must have been around midnight, and I was just sorting out some paperwork while absent-mindedly texting a friend. I had to print off some documents for personal reasons, and I'm sure that the company wouldn't mind a few pages and a dot of ink. Just as they were coming out of the printer, it jams. I swear under my breath, look into the printer and try tugging on the page, but it rips. Annoyed, I do the thing where you have to flip the printer open to retrieve the damaged page. It was a careful, tricky business because my tug had ripped the page in several different places and now was trying to fish little bits of paper out from all the printer cogs that were so annoying. I don't know if it was just my printers, but I had always hated them. They're always slow, they never work. And the workworm, which was the best one I'd ever worked with, was now failing on me, which was super irritating. Just as the piece of paper is coming out after the second print, do I hear a voice behind me, print into trouble. Yeah, I say, absent-mindedly, just as the page is coming out. In truth, at that moment, I felt a little bit guilty because what I was printing was for personal reasons, and I hadn't been at the job long enough yet to know if people cared if you printed off a piece of paper for yourself, if it would be a big deal or not. So trying to kind of hide it, making out it was work rated, I was just going to be like, yeah, you know, logs and stuff. When I turn around to answer the phantom voice, There's no one there. I look down the corridor to where front desk is, and I see that there's a girl at reception, a different one than the one I mentioned earlier. I look around, try and ignore it, put my papers in my bag, and casually walk over to the girl at reception. I asked her if she'd seen someone go into the back office, and she says no, and I asked her who's working here tonight. She looks in the small red book in front of her and says that it was only me and her. I leave it there. I don't say anything else and go about and do my work, but that severely freaked me out. There's no way I imagined that voice, and after hearing everything that people have said and experiencing something that I truly couldn't explain for myself, am I convinced, and there might be more to the paranormal than I first thought. I used to be a delivery driver, which doesn't sound very interesting, because it isn't. I did have to deliver to some very remote places, though. One time I delivered to a trailer park just barely inside our designated delivery zone, and it was very dark and poorly lit. I'm leaving my car running and keep the headlights and inside lights on to go to deliver the pizza. Upon returning to my car, I sat down in the driver's seat and look up to see a creepy old man standing less than 3 feet away from my side of the car. He was just staring. It was the equivalent of a jump scare. I just started driving forward, had to do a U-turn to get out of the park, and when I turned around, the man was standing in the middle of the road. So I freaked out for a second while I sped around him, only to watch him attempt to chase my car out the trailer park. I put in my 2 weeks notice after that some friends and I were part of the Pennsylvania Ghost and Paranormal research team. At one point, no one ever believes me because my ex lost everything, including the recorder, in a house fire, which is creepy enough. We were in an old funeral home and didn't hear a damn thing the entire time until we went back to the recordings. There were sounds everywhere, old star music playing, and a woman who was very close to my recorder starting to hum really loud, and then said, "We're here." Hi. We were absolutely scared crapless. Listening to the recordings, I had tears coming down my face. On the second floor of the house, we clearly heard a man's voice saying, "Don't," and that was it. I still wonder to this day what the hell it meant. We heard many doors slam that we didn't want to hear at the home while we were there. There was also much of that on in the recorder. Strangely, we went through the basement where he would keep the bodies, and there was absolutely nothing but silence. There was a dead, half-eaten dog in the living room because we had so much evidence the first time. We went back a second time, and the property owner wouldn't let us back in because it was unsafe to walk anymore. They were about to do some renovations. Then life happened, and we never returned. Left the team and broke up with my ex. And then the fire. I wish to go back and record one more time. It's a thing I keep thinking about. It's like a life calling, and that house just sitting there unoccupied waiting for me. When I was 2, my parents and I lived in a house that my grandparents owned. Although only 2, I apparently could speak quite a bit, as well as a few sentences. My parents' bedroom was connected to mine through the closet, meaning you could walk into their closet, go through a door in the back, and end up in the back of my closet. Then one day, my mom started having these terrible nightmares in her dreams. She would wake up surrounded by fire. She'd rush through the closet to my room, scoop me up, and dive out the window. Suddenly, it would flash forward, and her and my dad would be sitting in a Waiting room at a hospital, a doctor would come and look somber and say, "I'm sorry." And then she'd wake up at that point, sweating profusely, and her heart racing. One night, she woke up to me screaming. She ran into my room and pulled me into her arms, calming me down and asking me what was wrong. My response was, "Mommy, mommy." My room was on fire. I was on fire, of course. This freaked the hell out, and I'm willing to admit that me having some sort of similar nightmare may have been caused by me overhearing a conversation about my mom's nightmares. But that's not the freaky part. Not long after this, we moved out, though not because of the nightmares. My mom was having me lived in southern Illinois at the time, and my parents were having a hard time making enough money to support us living there. So we moved up to northern Illinois. My grandparents sold the house once we moved, about 6 months after we moved out. My mom was talking to my grandma on the phone. My grandma started telling my mom about how that the house we used to live in had caught fire. No one was home at the time, but the bedroom that had been mine had been completely destroyed. The fire had started because of an electrical short in the closet, the one I spoke of before. Every time I share this story, it gives me chills. I'm 24 and live in Michigan, and I've been working at a small airport for the past 4 years. Our hangars have been around since the 60s or 72nd. I've worked third shift on and off the entire time. During that time, me and some of my co-workers have all witnessed some weird stuff, but it seems like I've experienced the most of it. And I'm not sure why. Note that there are 3 people that work third shift to line guys and 1 dispatcher. We constantly hear weird noises, closing doors, footsteps, the occasional voices, and we look around and we never find anything. One night, my co-worker went home early because his pregnant wife needed him, and I was sitting in a chair at around 4 a.m. taking a break, watching a YouTube video. As I'm sitting there, what sounded like something extremely heavy fell and made a loud bang. It was loud enough that the dispatcher heard it from the other side of the building. My immediate thought was a jack gave out and plane fell, but nothing was knocked over or out of place. I freaked the dispatcher out so much he called the police to secure the hangar in case someone got inside. Another night, my co-worker, who no longer works here, called Barry, was in the bathroom with me when I came out and saw him go up the stairs into the office section of the house hangar. So I followed him up, and when I got to the top of the stairs, I asked him what he was doing. He turned around and had a look of fear on his face. He told me he saw me go up the stairs and was following me to scare me. He said whoever it was in the same outfit, same hairstyle, and had the same hat. Everything was the same, from the worn carrot coat to the Detroit Lions beanie with a stain on it and glasses. We searched the place high and low and found nothing. The only way out was past us or through the dispatch room. No one went through either. This next occurrence happened in January, right after a fresh snow on a calm night. The door to the hangar was just shaking like someone was trying to get in. We thought it wasn't latched properly, so we made sure it was secure. As we walked away, it started shaking again, but more intense. Once we get close to the door, it stopped checking the door once again. When we got to the other side of the hangar, it happened again. We thought someone had to be messing with us, so we looked outside and found no footprints and no wheel markings of any kind. The snow wasn't all the way up to the building, so we thought someone maybe walked on that section, but it was only on one section, so if it was someone, we'd seen them walking through The snow in another section. We checked the whole perimeter of the building and through the parking lot, but found nothing. These next few things I've seen personally, and no one else has seen anything similar. We have been dead since the whole COVID-19 shutdown. We shut off half the lights in the hangar now, and as I sit down on my phone, I can always see dark shapes in my peripheral. The weirdest is I can see a dark mass creep out from under the toolbox. It's the size of a soft ball, but it was extremely dark. It moves slowly, creeping towards me, and if anyone makes a movement where I look back at it, it shoots back underneath. Another thing is, I walked past our break room and saw someone sitting in a chair with their boots up on the picnic table bench. I could make out warm brown boots and blue jeans, but it was only the bottom half. I turned the light on, and there was nothing. After seeing those two things, I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time ever. I woke up and just saw a dark black figure standing in my doorway. It was clear because it happened around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This last thing happened 2 days ago. Me and my co-worker Terry was